first want to talk to you about being your father's son, being a part of the campaign. When the campaign started, and not many people really thought, Donald Trump had a shot at the presidency. What made you differ? What made you think otherwise?
Honestly, it was going with him, being on the road and watching the crowds form. There was an enthusiasm gap that was just lacking in anything else I'd seen in my 40 years. Being perhaps a junkie on the sidelines and following, from a distance. When you can be in a New Hampshire primary, it's, let's call it zero here and pretty much zero there as well. And you had lines of people waiting for 5 hours to hear, what would then be a politician speaking for a 45-minute speech. It was crazy. I couldn't believe it. Who would do that? I wouldn't do that for anything. And these people, I guess, were just fed up. They were sick of being made promises that were never going to be delivered. They were sick of what we're so used to, I think, in terms of politics, pretty much globally, I would say, but certainly in our country, where there's a lot of talk and not a lot of action. And I think they were ready for a change.
But this was a fairly keenly watched election. I mean, everybody was watching it. It was a no-holds-barred battle. There was nothing that was left unsaid. There was nothing that was left undone in this election. What was it like to be a part of the campaign? What were the exciting moments, really?
Listen, it was amazing. I mean, it was, I was pretty excited with business before we got into politics, but for me, I got to be sort of the tip of a spear of what you said was, perhaps one of the greatest political upsets in history. Not because it should have been an upset, but that's the way it was sort of pushed from a media narrative that was already dictated. So for me, I got to be a surrogate on something really special before we even had surrogates, because basically anyone that was in that business was, well, that's not going to happen. That could never happen. I have to go with an old standby, some of the people that's going to be one of the 3 people likely to take the crown and move on, and that's what we were going to do. So it was rather unusual. It was an incredible experience to actually go there, to actually be on the ground in all of these places in America that had been left behind, that had watched their American dream exported abroad, and see some of that hardship and see those stories. So it was truly an incredible experience.
I want to talk about the American dream in a little more detail, the quintessential American dream and how it's perhaps being redefined. But there were very low points in this campaign as well. I'm sure there were moments in the campaign that hurt you. As a family, did you at any point in time feel, is this all worth it? Should we be contesting this at all?
Probably every time I turned on the news. But that said, again, I think I got it, and I think I got what so many Americans got. It was interesting when we were even doing our own internal polling, and we were, large sample sizes. We would do a digital poll, and we would do a telephone poll, fairly traditional stuff. But again, huge sample sizes. So statistics would dictate that you get within basis points of each other. And we noticed our online polling was 15% better across the board than our telephone polling. And we started saying, wait a minute, how could that possibly be? But ultimately, there was this narrative created. People, they wanted Trump digitally, when they were at a computer, when they were going to be all by themselves, just like they would be in a voting booth. So they were okay. So we started asking the people on the telephone who were underperforming by 15%. Okay, you're writing in Bernie. You're writing in Jill Stein. Who's your neighbor voting for? Oh, that guy's voting for Trump. Meaning, people were willing to say your neighbor, someone who's likely to be fairly similar to you, that guy's voting for Trump, but they weren't necessarily willing to tell someone on the phone because they didn't want to hear the lecture of, if you like him, if you believe in some of the things that he's saying, you're one of the ists, you're this, that, the other. And so they weren't willing to engage in that. And the second we started asking that question, the 2 pollings just started lining up right away. So I always joked, there were wives that voted for Trump that didn't tell their husbands, and husbands that didn't tell their wives, because people didn't want to engage in sort of that visceral argument. It's unfortunate that it became that way, but it is a very binary system these days.
I will take forward the point about the lows and why is there such an acrimonious relationship, and is there any effort to fix it back in the US? But I will ask you this question. When did it dawn upon the family, when did it dawn upon you particularly, that your father was the 45th president of the United States?
Honestly, it took me a while. The one thing I'll say, business has highs and lows, but the frequency and the cycle is drawn out, right? You can miss a day, things change, but it's usually, other than, very set times. For politics, what I found it was 5 minutes up, 10 minutes down, 15 minutes up, 20 minutes down. It's such a tight cycle. The emotional upswings and downswings are so intense and so critical. Frankly, it was, totally fascinating. At the same time, it beats you down. And over a 2-year period, as vicious as it got, even when we won, or were told that night, it was like, wait a minute, what's the catch? You become so cynical it's terrible as a human. You don't want to necessarily actually even think that way, but you become so cynical that it was interesting when John Podesta got back on stage and said, well, let's talk tomorrow. I was like, I knew it. I was happier that I was right about my cynicism than the fact that we had won, and that's frankly terrible. But that is what, again, the emotional uptake did for you. What it really hit me was the day before the inauguration, so about 2.5 months later. I mean, that's borderline crazy as well, right? But 2.5 months later, pulling into Arlington National Cemetery for the wreath-laying ceremony, it's just sort of, it was a serene moment, and it all sort of hit in, and it was, again, sort of an uncharacteristically, for me at least, emotional moment where it was like, wow, there is a lot of responsibility to bear here.
And this is really happening. But before I go on to how life has changed and how things have changed, I'm keen to ask you a question about the presidency. It hasn't been an easy presidency to begin with. He's been under attack. A lot has been written and said. He has an acrimonious relationship with the media. How has that impacted the family? And how do you believe, is there any attempt at all to fix that relationship?
Well, listen, at this point, I don't know that there's any fixing. I mean, again, I'm here as a businessman. I'm here, not representing anyone. I'm here, and I've been coming to India for over a decade, so I understand the market, I understand the mindset. It has been difficult, obviously. I mean, you sort of wake up, you see the sort of the viciousness that become, the sort of binary, you're either one way or the other. And that's interesting for me. I mean, I live in New York City. I joke that it's the People's Republic of New York because the mentality and the politics there are very different than elsewhere in the country. But, I still have friends from there. And guess what? Our political ideologies may be totally different, but we're still friends. We still have lunches and dinners, and we still hang out. And we can do that, but there has been sort of a wedge driven between a lot of people where if you are actually, and I don't think we live in a totally binary world that way, so hopefully some of that goes. From a family standpoint, that's obviously difficult at times.
But you're a liberal, you have business interests in India, in China, in other parts of the world. As a businessman, you obviously would want lower barriers. You wouldn't want any barriers at all. And back home, obviously, America is looking inwards increasingly for reasons that you have justified, for reasons which the president has justified. What are conversations at home like?
Well, again, I think these days I see him so little that we don't actually talk politics. I used to be able to go in. It's not worth it. I get enough of it every other minute of the day just watching from the sidelines. So, frankly, we see him so little that when we're together, it's really about being a family because, that's sort of an aspect of our frankly, our lives that was such a big part. I mean, our offices were always next door. We were there. Now, when I think, hey, why don't I call him just to say hi? I think about the stuff that he's dealing with on a daily basis. When something goes on, in a country far, far away, and I don't even want to bother him. I feel it's almost trite to call him and just to say hello. Does that make any sense? It probably doesn't, but from my perspective, it does. So when I get to see him in the few short time I do, it's really about just sort of being together as a family unit.
And you're not talking politics or business at that time. But how has life changed for you and for your other siblings, for your kids maybe, to be constantly trailed by Secret Service? They're doing a phenomenal job.
They do.
But, to be in Delhi, to be in New York, to have security follow you all the time, that must be tough.
Well, listen, those guys do an amazing job, and they're just, great people. And so, I thank them for that. For me, it's different. I'm a 40-year-old guy, right? I've sort of been set in my ways my whole life. I've been reasonably pretty independent. I'm a big outdoorsman. I'm used to going camping and disappearing in the woods on weekends and doing those kind of things. So, it's certainly a change, but we've also had, our own fair share of scares, certainly even in the last 2 weeks. I won't get into the details of that, but it's, you realize that, the world isn't the rose-colored glasses world that we'd love to be able to live in at all times, and so you do have to take those precautions.
So let's turn focus and let's talk about India. This isn't the first time you've been here. You've done business in India for decades, over a decade now. How has India changed in terms of doing business then vis-a-vis now? Because I know you remember relating something in the past. You said the land was promised, and when you came here, it wasn't really available. So
I experienced India. There's two parts of that question. There's what I've seen since I've figured out the system,
sure.
And then there was figuring out the system. So it's fine. I probably don't even have to tell the story, and everyone knows what I'm talking about.
But let's hear it from you.
Yeah. For those who don't know, when I first came to India, I met a businessman in New York, and he was, had a great line of this, and I have the best piece of land in this market. You got to come see it, and you spend some time, and everything looks good. Then you get there, it's like, okay, well, let's talk business. Well, it's not really my land.
Who does the land
It's my cousin's land. Well, it's not really my cousin's land. It's my friends, uncles, dogs, walkers, owners. But now that you're here, let's talk business. So, I'm sitting there being like, I just traveled 18 hours for this. This is, but sometimes, I have found that, sometimes learning the hard way makes you appreciate once you figured it out that much better, makes you probably more adverse to making other mistakes. And so, now with the partnerships that I've been able to strike up, again, over 10 years, this is not something that I started doing last week and I'm here because I like India. Sure. It was something that I learned through the School of Hard Knocks. I saw the people, I saw the energy, I saw what was going on. I said, there's got to be something here. And so I was a bull on the market a long time ago. Now, because of this, we're saying we can't do new deals, understandably. So I have to take a little bit of a back seat, but that's difficult because I feel so good about the market. I feel so good about the partnerships that I have that, I could be doing 10x because I've gone through it. I've understood it, and now I get it.
I'm going to ask you a bit of a tricky question, a bit of an uncomfortable question perhaps for this audience. When you say that you take an 18-hour flight, you come here and realize the land actually doesn't belong to the gentleman or to his cousin or to his cousin's cousin either. Are Indian businessmen, and this is a constant complaint, are some sections of Indian industry willing to bend rules when it suits them?
Well, listen, I think there's an entrepreneurial spirit here that is, Again, it needs no further explanation, though the media will say that I said something totally different. But so there's an entrepreneurial spirit here, that is different than elsewhere in the world. But I have seen, the second part of perhaps the last question was, I have seen changes come. Once I got with the right people and understood, I have seen reforms. I'm not talking policy, I'm saying as an outside businessman coming in over the couple of years, I have seen changes. Some of the reforms probably hit everyone, but they also weeded out in the real estate sector, which was, if you were a developer, it was a 4-letter word. Okay, there was no trust because you were promised X and you were delivered X minus, if anything at all. And that doesn't work in the long term. So I think there's been, a burden imposed on all developers, the ones who have done a good job, the ones who are well-intentioned, the ones that I'm now, truly friends with, they've done a good job and they'll rise to the top anyway. It will weed out the bad players, and that needed to happen.
We'll talk about weeding out the bad players and the reforms that have been undertaken and how that's really changing real estate. But, you've got business interests both in India and China. And just for this audience here, actually, India is the biggest market for you outside of the United States?
Yeah, we don't have China. Actually, our focus, and my focus has really been in India because I've been able to break through there. I think there's an ease of communication here. Whether there's a language barrier, at least in the business level, where there is no difficulty. I think there's an understanding of sort of common law. A lot of things made it for me much more natural to be able to do business here. And I think, again, when I talk business, I'm in a relationship business. For me, I'd like to be able to work out a deal and never look at that contract again because we're on the same page. We have the same mindset. We want to build, in this case, luxury. When we're building luxury in India, I'd seen it, and I've seen it all over the emerging world where everything is luxury because I can get it double the premium. Well, just because you call it luxury doesn't make it so. And so I think what we've been able to do is actually truly harness luxury, bring it here, take it building and develop it here that you could sit in any cosmopolitan city in the world. And that frankly hasn't existed in the emerging world until very recently, and still very few people do it well despite what they bill it.
Will you say that a Trump Tower somewhere in Mumbai or Pune or anywhere else can actually be handpicked and taken to Manhattan? Is that what luxury will mean?
I think 100%. When I look at the building that were delivered yesterday in Pune, for example, it's a building that you could sit in any cosmopolitan city in the world and it would be on par with the best of the best. It's truly, but it's also an anomaly within that market, which has allowed us to do better with that product than others.
Fair point. Quick question on real estate, and you yourself said you don't want to get into the details and policy framework, but whether it's the GST or whether it was demonetization before that, these things have really led to the cleanup of the sector, but it has also led to a lot of asset price correction in this
Correct.
sector. You're in the luxury business, you're looking for down payments of $40,000 for a Trump property. For a real estate market that's fairly battered, how has business grown?
Again, because we're able to differentiate by actually delivering ultra luxury. And again, this is now a market that's mature in many respects in that our buyers are traveling around the world. Okay, before it was as global, before they traveled as much, you could say, hey, this is the best of the best. Well, now that they have flats in New York, Paris, London, they know that, and it was difficult for them. We always said it's sort of starved for luxury. They experienced it, they know what it is, but they couldn't get it in their home market. And so, being able to actually deliver that kind of product here has made a big difference.
Okay, a quick question, and I'm purely asking this question to you as a businessman, as somebody who's run a successful business. When we talk about a Make in America or making America great again, what does this really mean for global trade? What does this mean for businessmen looking to, take their business globally? What does this really mean to the new globalization that was spoken about here?
So I don't think that the concepts are mutually exclusive. I mean, I think you can look after your own country and everyone can benefit. I think if I look at some of the numbers that have come out of the various central banks with the concept of tax reform coming in, other countries have actually benefited with that. I just think you also can't, be in a system where you've left behind a very large section of the country, basically everywhere between New York City and Malibu. It doesn't work. And so you have to be able to take care of all of those things, and that doesn't mean that you can't still thrive and work in a global workforce. And that's just me as a businessman.
Would you say that the quintessential American dream where merit will survive and will thrive despite all odds is still very intact? Because a lot of people in this room would beg to differ.
I think 100%. I mean, I think that's what everyone's been advocating for, is a merit-based system.
Okay, let me ask you two quick last closing questions. One of them has to be on your relationship with Ivanka Trump. She was here for the Entrepreneur Summit. Again, a very visible face of the Trump presidency as an advisor. What's your relationship with your very famous sibling like?
It's been great. I mean, we've always had a very close relationship growing up. Again, now that she's in D.C., with a hectic schedule of her own, we don't get to see each other as much. But growing up together, I think we always, whether it be some of the adversity with sort of a rough and vocal, divorce with our parents, I think we've always had a very close and tight sibling, unit. And so, and it's the same with, frankly, my brother. And so, him and I are now running the organization and focusing on those business. But, family has always meant a lot to us, as it does for our children and everyone around us.
All right, a quick last question. If you were in a room with Barack Obama today, what would the conversation be like? What would the two people be talking about?
Well, listen, I think similar to the conversation that we had earlier, it's like, I live in a place where I'm one of the few people that are conservative in that market. And so, I think it could be fine. I think I'd love to see more actual open discourse rather than sort of the binary nature of our politics where you can't even possibly say that. Or, we have freedom of speech as long as I agree with everything you're saying, in which case if I don't, we no longer have it. So, and I've seen that. I've seen that in the media. I saw it, for example, I did an interview the other day.
That's right.
And we were talking here and we had this incredible conversation. They asked me, Don, you've traveled all over the emerging world. You've experienced it. What separates India from the rest of the world in the emerging world? And I said, well, I gave this long, sort of uncharacteristically sort of emotional answer, for me at least, right? So I said, listen, the spirit of the people here is really unique. There's a happiness that goes, and I gave every disclaimer language possible. I said, and I don't mean to be glib, and I fully understand the hardship that's there, but there is a spirit, there is a joy, there is sort of a smile on your face that you see here that you don't see anywhere else. And I don't know if it's a nationalistic pride, whatever it is. And so I have
just a happy bunch of people.
Happy bunch, and everyone knew what I was talking about, and the Washington. Wait, but it gets better. So this was like, I really meant it. And again, it wasn't me coming here for the first time, it's me coming here after 10 years. So I give this response, everyone gets it, and I read the Washington Post the next day. Donald Trump Jr. likes poor people because they smile. I'm not joking. I actually ran into the reporter that did the interview with me yesterday at a cocktail party on something else, and she goes, I can't believe they did that to you. You didn't even say it. I go, welcome to my life. So I am the first person in the history of India to say, I love the Indian media. They are so mild and nice.
A big round of applause for anybody who begs to differ.
Because they're at least, everyone understands that joke too. Because as aggressive and as brutal as they can be, they've at least been fair.
All right, a quick last question before we close this, because we have to prepare for the Prime Minister's arrival. You've been here on business trips before. This is different because you can't be inking business deals. You're just perhaps going to look at business that's ongoing. You can't be inking new projects.
Correct.
How different has this trip treated you?
Well, listen, it's been great because we have various projects in various phases. And, again, for me, the partnerships that we've struck here have really turned into friendships. So it's great to be able to see that. It's great to be able to see, we are builders. That's what we do. So to see that creation process take place, to see the sort of way we've been able to get in markets and do so well and just been well received, that's been incredible for me because it's sort of the end of 10 years of hard work to get there. So that's rather unfortunate. I say, wait a second, this should be the time where I'd be able to capitalize, and that's a sacrifice we're willing to make, and we have made it, voluntarily so. But it is a big sacrifice because a big part of my life to say, hey, I'm going to take 8 years. I'm 40. Let's call it 23% of my life, and we're not going to do anything. It is difficult and it's tough as a businessman, but again, fully understandable. And because of the fact that we've been here, because of the fact that we know the people here, I think when we're ready to get back into the market in time, when we're out of politics, I think we'll get some credit for it and we'll be welcomed again with open arms.
So in 30 seconds then, you said you would have liked to have a conversation with Barack Obama, which wasn't binary. Have you had a conversation with him?
I haven't. I shook his hand at the inauguration. Seems like a fine man, but I don't know him well enough to let you know.